All right. Good morning, everyone, and welcome to day 2 of the World Seed Congress in Lisbon. I hope everyone's had their coffee and is ready for what I know will be an extremely engaging discussion this morning. I'm going to be a moderator. My name is Pratima Singh, and I'm the lead for Economist Impact's Food Imperative Initiative. Economist Impact is, if we could have the slides up, please, thank you, is the in-house think tank of the Economist Group. We have a very long track record of doing evidence-based independent research on some of the world's most pressing and urgent challenges today. I'm going to kick off our discussion today with a very brief presentation, I promise, on the Resilient Food Systems Index, or RFSI for short. It's the index we recently launched, and it takes a systems-wide view on how countries are performing across 4 key interconnected pillars of affordability, availability, quality and safety, and climate risk responsiveness. And as we move into the discussion today, we want to keep that broader perspective. The RFSI helps us keep that broader lens of not only what we need to do in terms of innovation, but also how innovation can help us obviously improve yields, improve productivity, but really contribute to that original question, the original ask of us as a global food system, which is how do we make progress on resilience? And so in that context, any technologies, gene editing, advanced plant breeding, are not standalone solutions. They're really part of that wider resilience agenda that depend on policy, markets, science, regulation, farmer access to all work together. At Economist Impact, we've been doing work on food systems for over a decade. We launched our Global Food Security Index back in 2012, the Food Sustainability Index, and really, we're kind of bringing it all together into an evolution, which is what we got the Resilience Food Systems Index from. And the idea here is that today, food systems are under immense pressure and facing challenges from interconnected risks, right? Geopolitical, economic, climate risks. And the challenge today is not just producing more food, it's ensuring that food systems can reliably deliver affordable food that's safe and nutritious, even under disruption and immense shocks. And this is where the systems-led approach is critical. The Resilient Food Systems Index offers that holistic view. It's looking at not just how production works, but production, distribution, consumption interact across the value chain. So just a quick note on methodology. This index is benchmarking 60 countries and countries' capacity to produce and deliver sufficient, affordable, and nutritious food amid a frequent and severe risk climate. The 4 pillars that we measure progress on are affordability, availability, quality, safety, and climate risk responsiveness. And we've combined 71 quantitative and qualitative indicators that look at international, national data sources, as well as forward-looking factors and government policies and surveys. Now, what you're all waiting for. What are the results? The RFSI offers a very clear view of where we stand and what global resilience looks at in food systems. Portugal is leading the way. You heard about this at the opening ceremony. This was before we knew this Congress was in Lisbon, I promise you. But across countries, the ingredients for resilience are already there. There's policy ambition, there's technological capability, financial tools, and regulatory capacity. But often these tools are operating in isolation, and we need them to be connected. We need all of the tools in the toolkit to really make progress. Countries are scored on a 100-point scale. Portugal ranks 1 with a score of 76.83. On the other end of the spectrum, we have the Democratic Republic of Congo with a score of 34.86. Obviously, these 2 countries are on the ends of the spectrum, but what we see in the middle is a large gap of 42 points between the leaders and the more vulnerable countries on this index. The gap shows that resilience is uneven. It's measurable, it's improvable, very crucially, but right now, no country even the leaders, are not resilient completely. They're still vulnerable to shocks. No country is above an 80 score quite yet. And so really what we're trying to show is that those countries are performing well, but they still have space to improve. And obviously, crucially, many other countries have a long ways to go in terms of impact on resilience and making their food systems more resilient. Now, I'll break some of these scores down into pillars as well. Overall, our average for all 60 countries globally is 63.9. Now, if you look at this by performance by pillar, you'll see affordability and quality and safety are some of the more relatively better performing pillars, but there's still work to do in both these areas, which we'll discuss in the next slide. The other two pillars, climate risk resilience and food availability, are weaker across almost all countries in the index. And really, it's interesting to see that when we think about it across the food supply chain, you've got affordability, quality, and safety where we need to do work. But really, the climate risk responsiveness remains the weakest pillar that we really need to improve on as a global food system. I'll share one more stat here on this before. When we did a cut of analysis across our 60 countries, we looked and divided them into major food producers and major food exporters as well. 15 of the largest exporters in our index produce about 70% of the world's food. Their average score is about 70. The 15 largest producers score about 65. And of course, 11 of those producers are also the largest exporters. And what this is suggesting is that the countries that are most critical to food systems, when they are secure, the system's working, which is great. But we need to make sure that all systems are stabilized, because if there's a shock in any one of these markets, there can be systemic issues across the food system. Now, what are those findings telling us? And we have an entire report on this, but I'll kind of share 3 levels of insight. One, affordability is relatively well-performing, but it's inequitable. The average is about 71, but when you split this into higher income and lower income countries, there's a huge gap. And then, even then, when we look at the combination of affordability and quality and safety, we found that there are some significant gaps. In 62% of the countries that we examined, the cheapest healthy diet takes about 2/3 of the poorest household's income. And we know this. 2.6 billion people today cannot afford a nutritious and healthy diet. And so it's not just about what we're consuming, it's how nourishing that food is. The second key insight is around infrastructure, which remains very critical to resilience, but lagging, according to our research. Globally, about 13% of food is lost between harvest and retail. And I know we'll talk about this as well, but transport and logistics, which is a key factor here, scores an average of about 56.8. So there's a lot of room to improve here. And investing in cold chain capacity, improving policy and investment in this sector remains critical. And then finally, the third point on climate risk is, as you've seen, the weakest performing pillar, but really critical for us to improve resilience. Innovation is not the missing piece. It's not the challenge here. Political commitment to mitigation and adaptation, which is an indicator we measure, lags far behind with a score of just 34.03. And so we really need to improve our commitment in order to improve resilience. Finally, key insights, 3 key insights. We need to advance affordability alongside access and nutrition. We think fiscal policy that shifts towards more nutritious foods can support. Dietary guidelines that align with health, sustainability, and access are critical. And the index reveals a very strong correlation between agricultural trade and both affordability of healthy diets and dietary diversity. So we can see that there is benefit in improving, not just in terms of supply shocks, but even in terms of affordability and dietary diversity. Scaling infrastructure and innovation remains critical. We need to invest in transport, storage, cold chain capacity, and also barriers to leveraging digital agricultural technologies need to be improved. We can see that there is innovation happening, but reliable electricity, broadband connectivity, some of those foundations are still not quite there, particularly in rural areas. And so expanding that is critical to improve farmers' access and to help innovation scale. And finally, we need to strengthen climate resilience. We have to have clear, high-impact, ag-specific targets that need to be embedded in national climate strategies. And scaling resilience will really depend on directing policy towards proven, scalable solutions, whether those are early warning measures, disaster risk reduction strategies, or new technologies. Now, in closing, we can only manage what we can measure. We heard this yesterday as well. And we can't use yesterday's toolkit to solve today or tomorrow's problems. And so the point of this index is really to be able to help us ask those right questions and also take a broader lens to what is needed for technology and innovation, not simply to improve production, but also how to strengthen resilience across the ag value chain, from farm productivity to climate adaptation to reduction in food loss and waste, and improving nutrition and affordability. So with that, thank you for giving me the time. I'm really excited to moderate the session, but before that, we have a quick update from Paula Belhaj-Farnier as well from the ISF. So over to you, Paula.
Thank you very much, Christina. Do you hear me, everyone? Good morning. So as Pratima has mentioned, and as you all heard it already at the opening ceremony, we are really gathering today when the time of global food system is under increasing strain and when the need for innovation has never been more urgent. Today, you've heard the figures: over 600 million people still go hungry to bed each night, and more than 2.3 billion people experience food insecurity worldwide. And at the same time, 2.6 billion people cannot really afford a healthy diet, highlighting not only a challenge for quantity, but also of quality and access. And these pressures are intensifying, as really clearly mentioned by Pratima. And again, climate change is already reshaping agriculture, with disasters and extreme weather events have caused trillions of dollars in agricultural losses over recent decades, while drought alone accounts for more than 1/3 of production losses in some of the most vulnerable regions. For farmers on the front line, these are not statistics. These are really daily realities. And against this backdrop, one message is clear: innovation is not is a necessity, not an option. And when we cannot meet future food needs with yesterday's tools, as Pratima nicely mentioned. And gene editing is one of the most promising and powerful tools available to us today, and we are fortunate to have our panelists today enlightening us around their experience. As in a world of increasing climate uncertainty, speed and precision are no longer advantage, they are really essential. But the missing piece is policy, and innovation alone is not enough. We must ensure that innovation reach farmers and consumers everywhere. Here lies really the greatest challenges we face today: a fragmented global policy landscape, and at ISF we have been mapping the evolution of this policy across the world. It is encouraging, we see, but it's also concerning. Encouraging because more and more countries are recognizing the potential of gene editing and adapting their regulatory approach, but concerning because the global picture remains highly fragmented. Across this ISF PBI policy map that I am showing here on the screen, countries are represented in different colors, reflecting different regulatory approaches. Some countries are moving towards enabling science-based frameworks. Others maintain more resilience and unclear approach. and many are still in transition or even nothing is happening there. This lack of alignment creates uncertainty for innovation and investment, potential barriers to international seed trade, and ultimately delays in delivering improved solutions to farmers and consumers. In a global seed system, when breeding, production, distribution, and spanning multiple geography, this fragmentation directly affects the ability to move and trade seeds where they are mostly needed. This is not really only a regulatory issue, it is a developmental issue, it is a trade issue, and fundamentally it's a food security issue. When policies are not aligned, innovation are delayed, supply chain can be disrupted, and farmers, especially in vulnerable regions, are left without access to the tools they need to adapt. At a time of increasing climate shocks, we cannot afford such delays. Farmers do not experience climate change in policy silos, they experience them in the field. And the policy really must respond with the same sense of urgency and coherence. So what do we need? We need to move towards greater global consistency, and we hopefully one day we get into a greener map. This doesn't mean identical system, but it does mean science-based, proportionate regulation, transparency, and predictability, and greater alignment across regions. By doing so, we can really enable innovation to scale, facilitate the smooth flow of seeds across border, and ensure timely access to improved variety to farmers worldwide. Ladies and gentlemen, we are at a crossroad. We have the science. We have the panelists explaining today to us their experience. We have the tools. We have the innovation. What we need is alignment. Alignment between policy and science, alignment across countries and regions, and alliance around shared objective to ensure that innovation delivers where it matters most on farmers' field and on people's plate. With this, I would like to thank our esteemed speaker and our moderator who will guide us through their experience in this space. And with this, I would like to thank you, and over to you, Pratima. Thanks.
Thank you, Paula. That was great. Very helpful in setting context. Welcome, everyone. Welcome to our panelists on this discussion on From Field to Lunchbox, the journey of gene-edited foods. We have on stage with me Tom Adams, CEO of Pairwise, Eyal Maori, COO and co-founder of Tropic, Professor Simona Radutoiu, Director of ENSA, and Paula Garcia, Deputy General DGAV, Portugal. Really great, insightful panel with different stakeholder groups. I'm really excited to dive in. Panelists, you've heard from Paula and myself on why we're talking about new technologies, what we need in the food system. But Eyal, maybe I'll ask you, why is gene editing important? Why does it matter? You know, your Tropic's non-browning banana had captured headlines globally, but it needs to solve a problem, right? So what kind of problems are gene editing solutions solving in tropical food systems?
Sure. First of all, good morning, everyone, and thank you for coming. So as a CTO at Tropic, but I would like first to share some personal perspective about gene editing. As a child, I grew up in a relatively warm country, Israel, and bananas, they ripe quickly, and they get mushy and brown. And my mom didn't like to waste bananas. And she used to come to me, and these are sweet honey bananas, they are the best. And as a child, I really didn't like them. So I used to hide it from my mother. So the non-browning banana is the perspective of innovation. I came to my mother and I said, Mommy, no more honey banana. Now, to the crop itself. Banana is an asexual crop, no breeding. Nature has invented breeding or sexual reproduction as a method to introduce genetic innovation. And in banana, you can't introduce this innovation. So gene editing allows you to introduce this genetic innovation. And what we do, by doing that, we introduce disease resistance, other traits that makes the crop not just more resilient, but also more valuable. If you look at the prices of bananas, they're actually cheaper now, if you take inflation into account, than 20 years ago. So no value. When there is no value added, everyone sells the same seed or seedling in banana. You need to add value. And gene editing also makes the crop not just more resilient, but more valuable.
Interesting. I love the personal experience that you started with. Thank you for that.
Sure.
Tom, maybe I can ask you to jump in. Pairwise has focused on bringing consumer-facing gene editing products to the market in the US. What have you learned from this experience of translating scientific information and traits into something consumers and people who aren't familiar with this system would understand?
Yeah, we work more broadly, and I'll echo Eyal's comments and thank everybody for coming. It's great to see a big turnout for gene editing at a conference with lots of things going on. So we started off with the idea that if this technology is going to make a difference, we have to have the public behind it. Mm-hmm. So while we work on some of the other crops, we really created this hypothesis that easy one, consumers buy products, they don't buy technology. So we looked for product fits that really could make a difference to the consumer, so they could see for themselves what the benefit of the technology is. And we found that's pretty successful, that consumers, you present them with something tangible, and they will interact with that in a positive way. Mm. You give them a survey, and there's a lot of people who might say, I'm not so sure about gene editing. You give them a healthy leafy green salad or a blackberry without seeds in it, and they say, wow, I really like this. And that gives them the connection to the product.
So it's linking it, of course, to a problem, but also to what consumers demand and want.
Which then opens it up to driving yield for the grower, and your discussion about availability and affordability, and it's an interesting balance between that, because if the grower can't make money, then food's not going to be available. And that's, I think, the balance that all those variables that you're walking through, it's really challenging.
Yeah. Simona, maybe I could bring you into the conversation. Of course, your work at ENSA focuses on earlier stage innovation before Pairwise or Tropic. From your perspective, where is that next wave of innovation going to come from? Is it more delivered through nutrition, nitrogen use, resilience conversation, resistance to disease? Like, what's exciting you right now?
Yeah, hello everybody. Nice to be here. And indeed, ENSA, which stands for Enabling Nutrient Symbiosis for Agriculture, it's an international consortia that brings together groups that work at different institutions from US to Australia. Mm-hmm. So it's really an international group of scientists that work together with a common mission to bring back in our seeds, in our plant material, the latest discoveries that enable plants to acquire the nutrients with the help of the microbes that already exist in the soil, because these are natural capabilities of plants. They have evolved for 450 million years ago. The microbes have accommodated and helped plants survive on Earth. So these capabilities exist naturally in plants. However, they are not optimal at the moment, and there is a large diversity between plants and between cultivars, and this is what ENSA stands for, to enable and identify what are the genetic barriers that limit these capacities for plants, and by this creating opportunities for farmers to have a genetic material that, when there is put it in their soils, has the capacity to use the resources that are already present in the soil. This is one of the major activities in ENSA. We work for enabling symbiosis, the intracellular symbiosis, which are the most efficient and most stable across mutualistic interactions between plants and microbes. And this enable plants to acquire phosphorus through symbiosis with arbuscular mycorrhizal fungi, or with acquiring nitrogen from the air with the help of the rhizobial bacteria that can fix the nitrogen. These are key elements that plants need, the nitrogen and phosphorus. These are key innovations, and we know that all the modeling and the data analysis reveals that enabling plants to acquire the nutrients will be of high value.
Critical, yeah. Nutrient use efficiency, and
Exactly.
of course in a time, the world where we are today, nitrogen use, phosphorus use, all of that, it's such a critical time. Making the most of the fertilizers we have can be critical. I know, Paula, I know we will talk about regulation for hours, I'm sure, but anything to add before I kind of turn a little bit on focus more on Eyal and Tom's focus on the pipeline?
No, it was very interesting to... sorry. Good morning, everybody. Welcome to Lisbon. I was born in Lisbon, so welcome to my beautiful city. And I hope that you return back for holidays in Portugal. Please know better Portugal. So it was very interesting to listen my panelists, colleagues. But I'm from the regulator sector.
Yeah.
So I don't know if you want to...
No, we'll jump into it, because I do want
All
to
right.
kind of look at it from a value chain
Yeah,
perspective.
I think it's very important
Yeah.
to have these research projects concerning new technology to give farmers the opportunity to use better and improved varieties. We need it. It was very surprised for me to see Portugal in the first
There's still room for
position of the
improvement.
resilience. Very good. So.
That's great, and I think that keeping the farmers at the center is really important, as you've all mentioned. Let's look at the pipeline, because we're at a conference and this panel is on gene editing. But I want to talk about how do we translate, or what makes science become a product, right? That's really interesting. So Eyal, with your experience and Tropic's experience, really illustrates how long product development can take. But what are the biggest bottlenecks that happen between the proof of concept stage to launch stage?
Sure. So it took us to develop Pomona, the non-browning banana, 8.5 years until the launch. Today, to launch the new product, it would take us probably half of the time. And the reason, because we had to set up the team, the pipeline, the know-how. We started early days, and there were lots of barriers that had to be removed technically to implement gene editing in banana. But if I focus now what really are the major bottlenecks, and I'm trying to generalize it beyond banana, I think probably the biggest one in our industry is access to elite germplasm. And I think early days when we set up Tropic, we realized that, luckily, and we looked for crops that we could own the crop, we could own the products. And back then, no one owns banana. And so the germplasm has been a major bottleneck. And I think the second one, there are many, but the second one is, let's say, aligned supply chain. And that means that your proof of concept is desirable by the grower. The grower trusts that the agronomic performance on top of the new trait is true to type, is good enough. Everyone understands the value, the pricing strategy, and eventually the consumer acceptance. So this alignment across the supply chain has been a bottleneck that you need to slowly validate, and that validates the commercial activity in the end of the day. And that takes some time.
Yeah. Value chain alignment is critical. Tom, from your perspective and from your experience with investors as well, where are those bottlenecks?
Yeah, it varies a lot from crop to crop. So I think Eyal sort of spoke to that about banana. And the reality is that most of what we classify as permanent crops, germplasm is not a bottleneck, because most of those crops, they're such long breeding cycles that things are long off patent, and it's possible to get into those. So things like the cherries that we're working on, Bing cherries, if you don't know, were actually bred in 1880. Now there's lots of different versions that have been bred since then, but Bing cherries still make up a big component of the sweet dark red cherry. So the germplasm isn't really an issue. I think you get into the larger acre crops and the bottleneck is regulatory. And that's, we talk about how gene editing can speed up things, and it can. It can make it so you can make a non-sprouting banana in a couple of years. 10 when you had to start, or 8.5 when you had to start, but now you could do it pretty quickly. And I think we took a little while on making our seedless and high-yielding blackberry, not quite as long, but nearly as long because there are some of the technical barriers. But you get into the regulatory challenge in a crop that's globally traded, then whatever the slowest regulatory system becomes the bottleneck for the product. And it makes it so you can't integrate with breeding programs. So one of the, I think, most exciting opportunities with gene editing is where we can really accelerate a particular trait and then breed with it in a forward breeding way. But as long as countries like Europe have not yet approved gene editing, then you basically have to treat it in a breeding program like it was a transgene, because you've got to go through the slowest piece. So I think that's, if there's one thing that could speed up innovation, it's getting the alignment of the regulatory systems.
Yeah, that's interesting. And we will talk about clarity, uncertainty, timelines with regulation as well. Simona, can I ask you, obviously you're working from the public, like an NGO perspective, but how should public sector research and organizations like yours and private sector developers like Tom and Eyal work together so that those early stage science and that pipeline can be really sufficient and does not remain trapped in the lab?
Yeah, this is a key aspect, and it's very good to hear the stories from Tropic and from Pairwise about bringing these technologies closer to the farmer, closer to the consumers, because this is where it matters. And for us working in academia at all the other end, this is what it matters as well. We do research for a mission. We have a mission to bring our knowledge and our latest discoveries as soon as possible to the public, and to the consumers and to the farmers where it matters. I see it at ENSA and in academia, what is most important, I would say, partnerships. And this is because, like you mentioned as well in the introduction, a lot of innovations are there. There is a lot of knowledge available in academia. Some of it is ready, some of it is much more ambitious and requires a long-term investment, like engineering nitrogen-fixing symbiosis in lawn legumes, for example. So partnerships that enables this transition from research, from the lab, to the products, to the companies, that this is the key important. And in ENSA, we are fortunate because we have the partnership with Gates Agricultural Innovations, which are taking care of these transitions and enabling and accelerating the research that comes from ENSA. And we know now that partnerships is necessary in research, as well as in transitions. So I would not see it necessarily as a chain, but I would see it more as an integrated process where the feedback between consumers, between breeders, between farmers comes back to research, and then we have a circle that becomes sustainable and brings affordability to the table.
That's great. Thank you. Thank you for fixing that. And it is definitely not a linear process. It is very much circular. We've spoken about regulation, risks. Tom mentioned also regulatory clarity. Paula, maybe I could bring you in. From a regulator's perspective, what is a good enabling framework? What does that look like? And how do you manage public interest while also giving developers enough clarity to make big investments?
Yes, very, very good question. And I was very surprised about the presentation given prior to the different approaches of legal frameworks in the world. Mm-hmm. So this is very bad, because at the end of the day, we farmers around the world cannot benefit from the research efforts that are being done in the world, because when we arrive to Europe, it's a completely different approach. So in our point of view, and Portugal, we have a very pragmatic position regarding the legal framework. We think that must be science-based, not based in the opinions, trends, and so on. And unfortunately, the majority of the EU legislation have a huge contribution on the opinions, trends, and not science-based. So that's why we are losing competitivity in the new technology and so on. It was what happened with GMOs. But we expect that this new regulation on NGT in Europe will be approved soon, I hope. We are waiting for the approval of the European Parliament that have been postponed the vote. Let's cross fingers that we will have the approval soon in June. But I think it must be a regulation that gives legal certainty to the plant breeders and seed companies, also ensure safety of the products to the consumers. So, and again, science-based legislation. We hope that the new EU regulation on NGT will be a completely new, different approach regarding the policy on EU of these new technologies.
Maybe at this point, for some of the folks in the audience who may not be familiar with NGT1, NGT2, if you could give a quick intro and the distinction really between the two.
Sorry.
And then I have a follow-up, but yeah.
Yes, so we have defined two different categories of NGT. We are just talking about mutagenesis and ensagenesis. It's the only two technologies that are covered by this legislation. The other technology will be still covered by GMO legislation. So in this new piece of legislation, we will have two categories, Category 1 and Category 2. For the Category 1 plants, it will be a very small modification on the genome of the plants that can be go to a verification process. And if the verification process, both made by the competent authorities of the member states or by the Commission, will be approved, so the NGT1 will be considered as conventional varieties. So no GMO legislation will be applied to NGT1. So only labeling, for instance, will be applied for seeds and plant material, not for the products along the supply chain, that it's good. For NGT2, it's a completely different issue. So we are talking about more complex modification on the genome. So there will be some derogations for the GM legislation, but at the end of the day, NGT2 will be covered by the GMO legislation, but there will be a kind of plant-based risk according to the modification in order to derogate some risk assessment criteria, and for instance, monitoring requirements will be reduced according to the characteristics of the NGT2. So at the end of the day, we think that in Europe, NGT1 will be the variety that we expect to be available to the EU farmers, because NGT2, there will be,
still a
like GMOs, will be very difficult to have cultivation of NGT2 in Europe.
Yeah, thank you for that. Eyal, can I come to you? Because we spoke of Europe. Tropic is UK-based, right? But the products that you're working on are for tropical environments. So how do you at Tropic think about that regulatory dissonance, if at all?
Yes. So banana is, I think, the most exported fruit in the world. So they're produced in one place, they're packed, they're shipped, they're ripened in a different place, then they're sold in different countries. So, and thank you very much for explaining further the regulatory landscape in Europe. The regulation process doesn't just determine where you can produce or sell your product, it defines the whole development strategy, where you're going to do the field trials, when you're going to produce the data, what's going to be the sequence of the market, where you're going to launch the product. And when you don't have that certainty, it slows down the process, it introduces risks, and that really affects the whole commercialization process. So the more clarity we have, and early days we had to, I don't want to say bet, but we just took a bunch of countries, that's where we're going to produce, that's where we're going to sell, and we just went in parallel through all of this. But now we have much more clarity. So we have regulatory approvals in several major production companies, and we can sell the Pomona in US, Brazil, Japan, hopefully in Europe soon enough. And that gives that clarity, and that's important.
Yeah. You mentioned the US, Tom. That's where you're based. That's where I'm based. The US has obviously has been relatively advanced, I guess. Can you explain, so that it gives others hope, what has the US regulatory environment enabled in terms of outcomes and in terms of practice?
And maybe to broaden from the U.S., I'd say the Americas in general, with the exception of Mexico, have been very much along the line that we regulate the product, not the process by which you make it. The U.S. has gone through a little bit of there was a rule, and then they undid the rule, and they're back to what the simplest one for gene editing is. There was one for a while, where we had to spend a lot of effort to show them that it was like breeding, and now it's back to a fairly straightforward, if the product was something you could have created through breeding, then you're going to regulate it the same way you would regulate a breeding product. So, that allows relatively rapidly to get into trials outdoors and to get into markets. South America has really led the way ahead of the U.S. I'd say some of the best, from my perspective, best rules are in place in South American countries. And that's, back to the sort of the question about how it affects us. One of the reasons that we have focused first on some of the produce products is because produce does tend to be a regional product. Yeah. Exception of bananas, which get shipped everywhere, most produce is fairly regional, so you don't need to worry about the import rules getting in the way and accidentally getting matter out of place, that somehow something ends up in a country it shouldn't have ended up in, and really difficult to track all of that. So we tended to focus internally. And then I mentioned how Mexico has been a little bit of an issue for very complicated reasons, I think, that get to the cultural importance of corn in Mexico, and then that just that impacts the whole supply chain. But that caused us, because of berries, to look, being for the U.S., many of them are grown in Mexico. So it forced us to think a little bit more broadly, and we actually went a little south, and right now we're producing in Colombia, which turns out to be, we wouldn't have ever gone there, but it actually turns out to be one of the best places in the world to grow berries. You can grow them almost exactly the same all year round. There's good system for shipping them to the U.S., et cetera. So there's even, sometimes there's a plus side to the challenges that countries create for you.
It requires creative thinking and figuring out new solutions. Yeah, I'm going to open up to questions as well in just after this final section. So please have your questions ready. We have roving mics around. But just before we do that, Tom, I want to come back to you, because you mentioned something right up front, which was around consumers. And this is such a critical sort of stakeholder group in this conversation. Trust, consumers. Obviously, we talked about value chain alignment as well, and they fit in there. But you've done a lot of work at Pairwise on consumer education. Can you talk a little bit about what's the language that works with consumers, what doesn't, what creates resistance?
Sure. And maybe just to start again, we started with, one of our ideas was, when we're talking about nutrition and food, it's important that a lot of people don't eat healthy diets. So we started looking at the produce aisle and things that people had done with traditional breeding that helped to drive consumption. And that brought us to see seedlessness as a really important one, and also year-round supply as being both really, really important things. So we started with a couple of things that there were analogs that made it clear that would drive consumer acceptance. And then, of course, we talked to consumers about, I was actually a little surprised how many people don't like the seeds in blackberries, but it turns out most don't. And when you guys get to eat a seedless blackberry, you'll see that it probably is better than you even expected. because it changes the experience when you don't have the gritty seeds in your mouth when you're chewing them. But to the language, we did some studies on the story. So we started with the idea that you can only be transparent before people ask. So we want to tell people in one way or another that technology was involved in creating the product. So we've looked for ways to do that. Found you use the word gene, and people don't think genes are in their food, so it's better to not use the gene. We've done things like saying better flavor through CRISPR, those types of things, fairly neutral in terms of the consumer response. So we want in the long run to, we're all for consumer choice. We want the consumer to be able to see how technology has advantaged them. And I think, ultimately I'd like to see us be proud about the gene editing and its more sustainable production through gene editing and these sorts of things that I think we should take the bull by the horns and not let ourselves be on defense. We should be on offense.
Yeah. So focusing on the outcomes first, and then eventually...
And the positive benefits.
And the benefits, exactly, rather than overselling, which I want to also come to. Eyal, for your products, like the banana, the non-browning banana, you also mentioned value chain alignment, right? We're talking about customers right now from Tom's perspective. But across the value chain, who needs to see the benefits, or who needs to see the value, really? Is it everyone?
Yes. I think it is important that everyone can see a value, but it is expressed in different ways. For example, with the non-browning banana, the consumer has more convenience and less waste. The retailers, they reject less bananas due to bruising or handling. The shippers and the exporters, again, they reduce loss, which is important. By the way, from the farm to our kitchen, between 30 to 40% of the bananas are lost. So there is major loss of bananas. And eventually the grower, before the grower, so the retailer, what the non-browning banana, they do, they don't just reduce waste, they open a new category, the fresh cut fruit category, which has been blocked for bananas because they become brown, mushy, honey, unattractive bananas. So that brings value to the retailers. Now to the grower, because this is really important. The growers indirectly see the value, but what they witness is increased yield overall, more demand, and the crop is becoming more valuable. So it's important that everyone can realize the value, even if it's in different forms.
Yeah, and communicating, using language, obviously, for consumers, but also for individual stakeholders within the value chain. Paula, maybe I could come to you. What role do regulators need to play around trust? Maybe starting with consumer trust as well. Tom had a good thing, which is you can only be transparent before someone asks, right? That's an interesting way to think about it. But do you also need to be transparent with regulatory logic to consumers, or is safety enough?
Yes, of course. So the regulators entities have a very important role in order to communicate science and explain the regulation. And in this piece of regulation, the NGT regulation in Europe, we have included a lot of references to sustainability. So I think it was very clever from the Commission side when they proposed the regulation to include sustainability criteria. So we can explain, in this case, NGT varieties that can contribute to sustainability of the farming system. So it's very important to have the capacity to communicate to the public that we need this new technology in order to have more resilient varieties. But however, I think that regulators have some difficulty to approach the public. Normally, we communicate with operators, with the professionals. So we have very difficult to reach the public and the consumer. So we need to learn more, to have more skills regarding marketing and how to approach the public, to explain the regulation. It's very important to learn about it, because at the end of the day, all our events or even our speeches and so on, people we are listening us are professionals, farmers or companies, not the public. So this is a huge challenge for us to reach the public and the consumer, and we need to learn how to do it.
Yeah. Did you want to jump in, Simona?
Yeah, I will just say that it's important to reach the young generation.
Yeah.
And we see this. We see in academia a major change in the way these new technologies are actually perceived. And not only the young generation, because in academia we also have open days and we have seminars where the public is coming and learning about these new technologies. So talking directly to the new generation, to the public is key, and it's important to mention, like you, Paula, mentioned, that this is science-based, that there is direct evidence showing numbers.
Yeah.
When during our lectures we show how many sprays are needed for a crop to be maintained healthy, and what are the costs for health for packet, and what can these be actually mitigated with a single gene edited. That's has a major impact.
Yeah. Speaking of youth, I'm going to open up the floor to questions. I know we have one here, so if we could start with them, please, and then maybe two at the back. If you could introduce yourself, please.
Yeah. Hello, everyone. I'm Paula Manzano. I'm from Spain. I'm a biotechnologist and master's student in food innovation, and also engine youth ambassador. So my question is for Tom as Eyal, as Simona already answered it. As how are your organizations and companies trying to adapt the value chains to engage youth? As we are more open-minded than past generation, but we are also looking for some more health benefits to us. Thank you.
Eyal, do you want to kick off?
You want to start?
Sure. I mean, I don't know that we are approaching, I think you said how we engage youth.
Yeah.
And I think that youth maybe comes at it more open-minded and open, so I'm not sure that we have any specific target towards younger people, especially, our relationship is more with the grower. But maybe just a comment on the overall engagement. I think what we found is it's important to have a little bit of empathy for the consumer and recognize how much information we're bombarded with all the time. So you're not going to get the intention of somebody to even explain what SG1 and SG2 are.
NGT1 and NGT2.
Well, I mean, they confuse me, and I do this all for a living. So you're not going to have the attention. So making things simple and focusing on the benefits to people, which I think in general, there was a great comedy thing done a couple of years ago where a bunch of young people were talking about sustainability, and they were talking about how I bring my stuff to the recycling when it's convenient, right? So ultimately you have to make it easy for people to do what they want to do, but it's hard. So,
Yeah.
So I know the young generation also through academia. I also had a group in the University of Cambridge. And the young generation is quite pragmatic and is quite aware of the challenges around us. And they want tangible missions. So for example, our vision is to introduce innovation to places, food, and people who need it most. And we're working hard towards that. Banana is at risk of devastating disease, and we're working hard on saving the bananas. So we engage the young generation, and not just the young, everyone, in the mission of saving a crop, making sure that our food is secure with also affordable prices. Mm-hmm. And I think that talks to a few.
Thank you. One question from, I think we've heard from, okay, if we could just get that one question from there, and then if you could keep it short, please. So.
Sure. My name is Amitabh Mohanty from Rice Tech, and my question is both for Tom and Eyal. What are the biggest barrier in your view for the wide adaptation of gene editing technology, and what can we do to change it? Thank you.
you take this one first.
Sure. The wide adoption. Mm-hmm. Did I hear you correctly? Sure. I think what we are now reaching is the alignment across the supply chain. And now we need the consumer to feel confident and with trust to consume it. And I think that's the next step. And we see it happening. We see demand to our products. But in the next few years, it's really going to be out on the market, and we are very much hope that we earn this trust, this social trust.
Yeah.
Maybe take
Tom,
a slightly more pragmatic answer to that is I think time and money are the biggest barriers. That agriculture has very long cycles already, and the amount of time it takes to get these products out and the amount of time and the amount of investment it takes is still significant. And I think, we're almost through some of the time with the bananas and our berries and a couple of other things, and hopefully that'll help to overcome the money in the long run. But it is, I think, one of the bigger challenges of whether this technology will make it all the way to all the promise that we talk about is whether we can overcome those two things.
Yeah. Thank you for that. Time, money, partnerships, regulatory clarity, I think, all really critical elements. Please join me in thanking our panelists for what we could talk about for hours, but thank you, Tom, Simona, Eyal, and Paula, for a really good discussion. And thank you to you all for joining. Tune in to or join our next session, which is on biologicals on seeds, building clarity and guidance across regulations at the Channel World Seed Studio from 10 to 10:30 a.m., which is in about a minute. Thanks, everyone. Have a great rest of the day. Thank you.